Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm a former Boeing 737 pilot and a member of the PMDG 737 tech team. In today's video, let's discuss the landing on the Boeing 737 in Flight Simulator 2024. So, we are going to start with a little bit of theory while the airplane is frozen in place. Thereafter, we are going to disengage the autopilots and conduct a manual landing on Palma de Mallorca's runway 24 left. But we're going to start with a bit of theory. So, let's start with the approach itself. As mentioned at the very end of the descent and approach tutorial, every good landing starts from a stabilized approach, and an approach is considered stabilized when your speed is within plus 10 or minus 5 knots of the target speed, when you are on the localizer, when you are on the glide slope within 1 dot each, when you're at an appropriate pitch attitude, at an appropriate rate of descent, at an appropriate thrust setting, and finally with the landing gear down, flaps in the landing setting, and the landing checklist completed, down to the landing lights, which is the last point here, which get turned on when the landing clearance is received. So let's go ahead and start with some bases. Every airplane can be flown by its pitch and its power, and the 737 is no difference to that. So, using flaps 30, we are normally looking for about 1 degree of pitch attitude, and our power should equal the gross weight minus 4. So our current gross weight is 63.6%, so once we are stabilized and on speed, we need approximately 60% N1. If we were to conduct a flaps 40 approach, our pitch should be 0 degrees, and the N1 should equal the gross weight, so 63.6, so roughly 64% N1 under the given conditions. When you use this basis for your manual flying, it will be very easy to track the localizer and the glide slope accurately, while of course allowing for some corrections due to varying winds and turbulence, which we of course always have to take into consideration. Now, maintain stabilized flight and do not make any great changes. Only make changes as small as required in order to maintain the stabilized approach criteria while you're flying the approach. Now, we fly the airplane down all the way to 50 feet, and once you have a little bit of practice on the airplane, you will be able to maintain the glide slope and the localizer exactly all the way down to 50 feet. At 50 feet, we are going to transition our point of view to the very end of the runway. Prior to that, we always look in, look out, and fly the airplane with our view looking out more and more the closer we get to the runway. So at about 1,000 feet, we would be looking 3/4 in, 1/4 outside, and as that is transitioning to the point where we eventually start the flare, it becomes more and more outside and less inside. Now, when a manual landing is planned from an approach with the autopilot engaged, the transition to manual flight should be planned early enough to allow the pilot time to establish airplane control before beginning the flare. The pilot flying should consider disengaging the autopilot and disconnecting the auto throttle 1 to 2 nautical miles before the runway threshold, or approximately 300 to 600 feet above the landing field elevation. That is to enable you sufficient time to establish proper control of the airplane and getting a feel for the airplane before you have to start the actual flare maneuver. Now, when the runway threshold passes out of sight under the airplane, shifts the visual sighting point to the very far end of the runway, and that assists in controlling the airplane's pitch attitude during the flare. So you do not look at the PFD at all, you just look outside and you judge your pitch by how the airplane behaves in your vision. So you look at the end of the runway, and then you will see the glare shield go up and down as you change the pitch. Now, the flare is initiated when the main gear is approximately 20 feet above the runway by increasing the pitch attitude approximately 2 to 3 degrees. That slows the rate of descent, but we do not intend to go parallel to the runway, so actively fly the airplane down onto the runway. A normal flare will take between 4 to 8 seconds, using up between 300 and 600 meters of runway. So forget about the markings on the runway, forget about anything else. 4 to 8 seconds, between 3 to 600 meters of distance is what you need. After the flare is initiated, smoothly retard the thrust levers to idle and make small pitch attitude adjustments to maintain the desired descent rate all the way down to the runway. A smooth thrust reduction to idle also assists in controlling the natural nose-down pitch change associated with the thrust reduction, since the engines are located below the airplane's center of gravity. Generally, small thrust changes, and once you're entering the flare, gradually reduce the thrust to idle so that it reaches idle by the time that the airplane touches down. A normal touchdown happens with an airspeed at approximately VREF, so approximately down here at VREF. Now, ideally, main gear touchdown should occur simultaneously with the thrust reaching idle. Now, with all of that in mind, avoid rapid control column movements during the flare and never trim during the flare. The airplane needs to be in trim long before that. Do not trim during the flare, that rapidly increases the possibility of a tail strike. A prolonged flare also increases the airplane pitch attitude by 2 or 3 degrees, which can lead, especially when coupled with a misjudged height above the runway, to a tail strike. So do not prolong the flare in an attempt to achieve a perfectly smooth touchdown. A smooth touchdown is not the criterion for a safe landing. That's very important over here. Now, with all of that in mind, normal touchdown attitudes are between, well, 3 to 5 degrees. However, if you are a little bit too slow, at VREF -5, a normal touchdown attitude would be somewhere around 6 degrees already. At VREF -10, it can go as high as 8.5 degrees. And a tail strike can happen from about 9 degrees pitch onwards. So, as you can see, you do not have a lot of margin. And that should really be taken into account with the 737. Finally, before we go into the actual landing itself, let's quickly talk about crosswind, because that is something that you are going to have on most landings, sometimes more, sometimes less. So, crosswinds. The airplane has been certified up to well, not certified, but demonstrated. We should make a difference here. The crosswind landings have been demonstrated until 40 knots on both a dry and a wet runway, 20 knots on a runway with standing water or slush, 35 knots when you got snow that is not melting, but as soon as it is melting, those things are going down rapidly. So that's something to have in your mind there. Now let's talk about the actual crosswind landing techniques. There are 3 methods of performing crosswind landings, of which 2 are certified with most airlines. The first one is the decrab during the flare, and this is normally done when you're landing on a dry runway. The objective of that technique is to maintain the wings level throughout the approach, flare and touchdown, and on final approach a crab angle is established with the wings level to maintain the desired track. This is what every approach starts with. So just prior to touchdown, while flaring the airplane, downwind rudder is applied to eliminate the crab and align the airplane with the runway centerline. As rudder is applied, the upwind wing sweeps forward, developing a roll moment. Hold the wings level with simultaneous application of the aileron control into the wind. The touchdown is made with crossed controls, so today with the wind coming from the left, we will have rudder right and aileron left on touchdown. Throughout the touchdown phase, upwind aileron application is utilized to keep the wings level. The second possible method is the touchdown in crab. The airplane can land using crab only, so zero side slip, up to the landing crosswind guideline speeds that I just mentioned earlier. On dry runways, upon touchdown, the airplane tracks towards the upwind edge of the runway, so today, with the wind coming from the left, the airplane would go to the left, while decrabbing to align with the runway. Immediate upwind aileron is needed to ensure the wings remain level, while rudder is needed to track the runway centerline. The greater the amount of crab at touchdown, the larger the lateral deviation from the point of touchdown. For this reason, touchdown in a crab-only condition is not recommended when landing on a dry runway in strong crosswinds. On wet runways, or especially on very slippery runways, landing the airplane using crab only reduces the drift towards the downwind side at touchdown which permits rapid operation of the spoilers and auto brakes, because all main gears touch down simultaneously, and may reduce pilot workload since the airplane does not have to be decrapped before touchdown. However, proper rudder and upwind aileron must be applied after landing to ensure directional control is maintained. Now, with all of that in mind, let's go ahead and go for our landing. Once we touch down, we are going to use reversers. Always use at least idle reverse, never leave the engines completely out of reverse. The reason for that is that the engines would spool down to ground idle a second after the main wheels touch down. Never let it do that. Always, as soon as the main gear touches down, pull the reversers so that you at least have idle reverse. You can use up to maximum reverse to stop the airplane, however, under most situations, and unless you're flying in particularly hot or high conditions, idle reverse is sufficient, while also saving some noise emissions and some fuel. But up to maximum reverse can be used at your discretion, at least according to the airplane manufacturer. We're not talking about things like local airport restrictions and other stuff like that here. Alright, so that much for the theory. Then let's go ahead and get right into this. So before I'm unpausing the simulator, let's already disconnect the automatics here. So autopilot, disconnect, first press causes the warning, second press silences the warning. Thrust levers. Match your hardware levers with your sim, which by the way can nicely be indicated with that blue arc over here. So match them up like that. And then, first press disengages auto thrust, but still shows you the warning. Second press of the instinctive disconnect switch also silences the warning. Or removes it from view, however you want to call it. Alright, and that's our setup for the approach. So let's now leave the active pause and continue landing our airplane. Small corrections, both in thrust as well as in pitch and bank. You can see my control column at the bottom of the screen there. Stabilized approach settings, so we need about 60% N1, a little bit more right now since we are a little bit slow on speed. Like that, and once you're on speed, remember flaps 30, 1 degree pitch, gross weight -4, flaps 40, 0 degrees pitch, and gross weight equals N1. Of course, always adjusted for turbulence and for wind. So, continue. Right now, I'm mostly looking towards the runway, occasionally looking at the PFD.
50.
Look to the runway end.
30. 20.
Flare, idle, decrap, little bit of aileron into the wind. Don't flare too long, fly it actively onto the ground. Here we are. Touchdown, thrust reversers, spoilers have extended, and verify the deceleration on the trend vector, and then brake as needed in order to vacate the runway at the runway exit that we're aiming for. So manual brakes, slowly apply the brakes until the auto brake disarm light comes on, and then we brake to vacate the airplane at the desired runway exit. Once the airplane reaches normal taxi speed and stopping is assured, you can go out of reversers. And with that, welcome to Palma de Mallorca. I do hope you have enjoyed this landing tutorial. As always, leave a like and comment underneath the video, and subscribe to the channel if you're up for more. Finally, if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. And if you do that, I'll also tell you to get the entire airplane clear of the runway before actually stopping. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm really looking forward to see you all again on the next one.